I woke up locked in a hospital room, and the nurse called me by a last name that isn't mine. They said I signed myself in last night, but the signature they showed me was mine, and I know I didn't write it. I tried to leave, but the door had no handle. And that's when they told me my family put me here. The paperwork said I was unstable, but I'd never met the doctor who signed it. I laughed when they said I admitted myself, until I saw my exact signature staring back at me. I had 10 minutes before my family visit, and I needed to figure out why my son-in-law had me locked away. They kept calling me confused, but I was the only one noticing the documents didn't match. I thought it was a mistake until I saw the power of attorney signed over to him. The door didn't open when I pulled it. There was no handle on my side, just a flat slab of metal where something should have been. And for a second I thought I was still dreaming until the smell hit me, sharp bleach and something medicinal that settled in the back of my throat. And a woman behind me said, "Easy, you just need to rest," like she'd said it 100 times before. I turned too fast, my head throbbing, the room spinning just enough to make me grab the edge of the bed. And that's when I noticed the clothes. Loose, unfamiliar, not mine. And my stomach tightened because I couldn't remember putting them on, couldn't remember coming here at all. "I think there's a mistake," I said, keeping my voice steady even as my fingers started to shake. But she didn't look surprised, didn't even look curious, just walked over with a clipboard already in her hand like she'd been expecting this exact sentence. "You're okay," she said softly, eyes flicking toward the corner of the ceiling before settling back on me. And that tiny movement made something cold slide under my skin because I followed it and saw the camera, small and dark, pointed right at the bed. I swallowed hard. "I need to leave," I said, and this time she paused, not long, just enough for it to feel deliberate, before answering, "You can't right now." And there was something about the way she said can't instead of shouldn't that made it feel final. I stepped closer to her, lowering my voice like maybe this was all just a misunderstanding we could fix if I sounded calm enough. "What is this place?" She glanced down at the clipboard, then back at me. "You were admitted last night," she said, like it was obvious, like I should remember, and I tried. I really did. But all I could find was a blurry flash of my kitchen table, a teacup still half full, and someone's voice telling me I'd been forgetful lately. "No," I said quietly, shaking my head, because that wasn't enough, that wasn't a memory, that was a gap, and gaps don't just happen. She turned the clipboard toward me then, not dramatic, not forceful, just a simple movement, and I saw my name printed clearly at the top, my full legal name, the one I only ever used on official documents, and underneath it, my signature, neat, precise, exactly the way I write it when I'm being careful. My chest tightened. "That's not—" I started, but the words didn't finish because it looked real, too real, every curve exactly right. And for a second I wondered if I had signed it, if I'd just forgotten, and that thought scared me more than anything else in the room. "You signed yourself in," she said gently, tapping the page once, and I noticed then there were more papers beneath it, thick enough to matter, edges worn like they'd already been handled too many times. "Who brought me here?" I asked, forcing the question out past the tightness in my throat, and she hesitated, again just a fraction, but I caught it. "Your family," she said, and that word landed wrong, heavier than it should have because family doesn't usually lock doors from the outside. Which one? I pressed, and this time she checked the file instead of answering right away, like she needed to make sure. And that's when the unease shifted into something sharper, something more focused. "Your son-in-law," she said finally, and everything in me went still because he'd been the one helping me lately, organizing papers, offering rides, pouring tea with that careful, polite smile, and suddenly that blurry memory at the table didn't feel harmless anymore. It felt like the beginning of something I hadn't seen coming at all. The nurse said I was safe here, but she wouldn't answer who approved my admission. I didn't panic when I realized I was trapped. I panicked when I understood it was all done legally. My son-in-law. I repeated, but it didn't sound like my voice anymore. It sounded thinner, like something cracking under pressure. And the nurse gave a small nod as if confirming something routine, which only made it worse because nothing about this felt routine. I took a step back, my heel hitting the bed frame, and for a second I just stared at the clipboard in her hands, at my own name sitting there like proof I couldn't argue with, until something else caught my eye. Dates, multiple dates, not just last night. And that's when the unease sharpened into something colder because I leaned in and saw entries going back weeks. Notes about decline, disorientation, family concern. Words I had never heard applied to me before. "This isn't right," I said, reaching for the papers before I could stop myself, and she hesitated again. Too late this time. So I pulled them free, flipping through faster than I could process, each page worse than the last, descriptions of behaviors I didn't recognize, appointments I had never attended, and signatures from doctors whose names meant nothing to me. "You've been evaluated multiple times," she said carefully, like she was trying to calm something volatile. But that only made my pulse spike because I knew, absolutely knew, I had never sat in front of any of these people. I stopped on one page where the ink looked slightly darker, fresher, and there it was again. My signature, identical, placed neatly under a statement claiming I was a risk to myself. And my hands went cold because it wasn't just one form. It was repeated, consistent, built into a pattern I hadn't even known existed. Who witnessed this? I asked, my voice lower now, tighter, and she pointed to a line near the bottom without meeting my eyes. And that's when I noticed the same last name appearing again and again in the margins. His last name, signed as witness, as contact, as responsible party everywhere. My chest tightened. "He brought me here," I pressed, and this time she nodded without checking the file, like she'd already answered that question too many times. And suddenly that memory at the kitchen table snapped into something clearer. The tea, the heaviness in my limbs, the way I'd tried to stand and couldn't quite get my balance right. I swallowed hard. "What time was I admitted?" I asked, and she flipped a page, scanning quickly. 11:42 p.m., she said, and something about that number hit wrong because I remembered looking at my phone before everything went blurry. 10, 15, maybe 10 to 20. And there was no way I'd driven anywhere, no way I'd signed anything, not in that state. "Can I see my phone?" I asked, and for the first time her expression shifted. Not much, just a tightening around her mouth. But it was enough. "Personal items are secured," she said, and that word secured didn't sound like safekeeping. It sounded like removal, like control. I took a slow breath, forcing myself to stay steady, but my eyes kept moving, scanning the room again. And that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. A thin red line on my wrist, faint but fresh, like pressure from something tight, and I rubbed at it instinctively, trying to place it, trying to remember, but nothing came except that same blank space where the night should have been. I need to call someone, I said, more firmly now, and she shook her head gently. You're not cleared for that yet, she replied, and the words landed heavier than anything else because they weren't about procedure. They were about permission. I looked back down at the papers in my hands, flipping one more time, slower now, and that's when I saw it buried near the back, a document thicker than the rest, stamped and initialed, with language I recognized immediately because I'd signed something like it years ago for someone else. Power of attorney. And my stomach dropped as I traced the name listed there. Not mine, not anymore, but his fully authorized, effective immediately, dated last night. My grip tightened on the page as the realization settled in, heavy and undeniable, because this wasn't just about being put in here. This was about everything outside of here. My house, my accounts, my life. And as I looked up at the camera in the corner again, a single thought pushed through the panic, sharp and terrifying. If he had control of all of it already, what exactly was stopping him from making sure I never walked out of this place at all? Then I realized something didn't line up. Not in the papers, not in the timeline, not even in the way they were all suddenly so careful around me. Because if this was just fraud, just forged signatures and rushed approvals, they would have shut it down immediately, cleaned it up, moved me out quietly. But instead, they were slowing things down, reviewing, verifying, asking questions that didn't feel like they were meant to help me. They felt like they were building something else. I sat there, watching them flip through my file again, and that's when I noticed a section I hadn't seen before, tucked behind the admission forms, older pages, stamped weeks earlier, and my chest tightened as I leaned forward, catching a single line before the folder was turned away. Cognitive decline observed. Dated long before last night, long before the tea, long before anything I could blame on him. Wait, I said, my voice sharper now, reaching for the file, and this time they didn't hand it back so easily. The man in the suit holding it just out of reach as his expression shifted into something I hadn't seen before. Not doubt, not suspicion, but concern. Where did these come from? I asked, but no one answered right away, and that silence stretched just long enough for something worse to slip in, because I started replaying things I had brushed off before, misplacing keys, repeating a question, the way my son-in-law had watched me sometimes, not with calculation, but with something closer to patience. These are preliminary evaluations, the man said carefully, and the word preliminary hit harder than it should have because it meant unfinished, ongoing, real. No, I shook my head, backing up slightly. Those aren't mine. But even as I said it, my certainty didn't land the way it had before. It wavered, just a fraction, just enough to make the room feel less stable. The admission process may have been mishandled, he continued, choosing each word slowly. But these records weren't created last night. And suddenly the story I had built, The clean, controlled plan, the deliberate trap, started to fracture at the edges because parts of it were real, but not all of it. I turned toward the hallway, searching for him, needing to see his face again, needing to confirm something. And when our eyes met this time, he didn't look panicked. He didn't look caught. He looked tired, like someone who had already been dealing with something I was only just beginning to see. "You said I've been forgetful," I whispered, more to myself than to anyone else, and the memory came back sharper now. The way I'd laughed it off, the way I couldn't remember where I put the documents he'd asked for, the way I'd signed something twice because I didn't remember signing it the first time. My hands started to shake again, but this time it wasn't anger driving it. "We need to run a full independent assessment," the man said, stepping closer, his voice steady, grounding. And for the first time since I woke up, I didn't know if he was helping me or confirming something I didn't want to be true. "I want to go home," I said, but the words felt weaker now, thinner, like they didn't carry the same certainty. And that scared me more than the locked door ever had. They exchanged a look, quick, silent, and no one answered me directly. I glanced back at the file, at the mix of forged pages and older notes. Real and fake tangled together so tightly I couldn't separate them anymore. And that's when the thought hit, slow and heavy. What if he hadn't needed to invent everything? What if he had just used what was already there? I looked down at my hands, at the faint red mark still circling my wrist, and for a second I couldn't remember when it got there. Couldn't remember if I'd already asked that question before. And as that gap opened up again, quiet and familiar, one question settled in deeper than all the others. If some of it was true, then how much of this fight was me proving him wrong? And how much of it was me trying to prove I still could?